My name is Rachel, and I'm 23 years old. I just graduated college, and I have a story to tell you about my house. Well, technically, it was my mother's house until she passed away from cancer 4 years ago. Now, it's mine. Mom was a planner. Even before her diagnosis, she had everything in order. She bought this house on her own long before she even met my dad. And when she got sick, she made sure I knew the details of her will. No matter what happens, you'll always have a home, she told me. I didn't understand how much those words would mean until I lost her. Things weren't always this complicated. My parents were together for 10 years before my dad left us for another woman. No drama, no custody battles. He just packed up and left when I was 9. The only thing he contributed after that was my college fund, a lump sum he put into a special account. I guess that was his version of child support. Dad remarried quickly. His new wife, Lauren, had their daughter, Olivia, soon after. I visited sometimes, but it never felt like I belonged. Lauren was always doting on Olivia, and Dad was constantly working. Gotta provide for my family, he'd say, as if I wasn't part of that family anymore. Mom was my anchor. She was a senior accountant, making enough for us to live comfortably. When she got sick, she quit her job to focus on treatment. I was 14 when we got the diagnosis, and for 4 years, our lives revolved around hospital visits and chemotherapy. She never complained, never stopped fighting, but cancer doesn't care about plans. She passed away when I was 18, just weeks before I was supposed to leave for college. The grief was unbearable. I could barely function. And that's when Dad stepped in. He, Lauren, and Olivia moved into my house temporarily to help me cope. At the time, I was too numb to question it. "We'll help you through this," Dad promised, placing a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Lauren nodded along, trying to look sympathetic, while Olivia wandered around, inspecting what was now my house. By the end of summer, I was faced with a decision. College was starting, and I had no idea what to do with the house. Selling wasn't an option. I couldn't let go of the last thing I had of my mother. But leaving it empty didn't seem smart either. That's when Dad made a suggestion. "Rachel," he said one morning, setting his coffee down, "what if we stayed here while you're away? We'll pay the bills, maintain the place, you won't have to worry about a thing." I looked at Lauren, who was making pancakes. She turned and smiled. "It would be good for all of us," she added. "Olivia's already enrolled in the local school, and we'd take great care of the house." It made sense. During the 2 months they'd been there, things had been okay. Lauren had stopped being distant, and Olivia had warmed up to me, so I agreed. Looking back, I realized how naive I was. I left for college feeling confident in my decision. I packed up Mom's personal belongings, keeping what mattered most and storing the rest in the attic. Over the next 4 years, I returned home for holidays and summer breaks. Those visits were surprisingly nice. Lauren would cook welcome home dinners, telling me, "I made your favorite lasagna." Olivia would pull me into her room, eager to show me her latest artwork. Dad would smile across the dinner table, like we were a real family. Christmases were warm. We'd decorate the tree together. Dad would lift Olivia so she could place the star on top. Lauren and I would debate whether tinsel was tacky or classic. We'd drink hot chocolate, laughing, and for a moment, I'd almost believe we had become a proper family. Summers were even better. Olivia and I spent afternoons at the pool. Lauren invited me to her book club, and we'd chat over wine about whatever romance novel they were reading. I called home regularly during the school year. Weekly check-ins with Dad, updates from Lauren about house maintenance. "The roses you planted are blooming beautifully." Rachel FaceTime calls with Olivia about her middle school drama. Everything seemed perfect. I never saw it coming. At 23, with my degree in hand and a job lined up in my hometown, I was finally ready to come home for good. I had accepted a position at a financial firm and was excited to move back in and start this next chapter of my life. The taxi dropped me off in front of my house on a sunny June afternoon. Mom's rose bushes were in full bloom, though they looked slightly different from how she kept them. The lawn was neatly trimmed. New curtains hung in the windows, small changes, nothing alarming. Wheeling my suitcases up the front steps, I reached for my keys, already picturing myself in my old room. But when I tried to unlock the door, the key didn't fit. I frowned and tried again. Nothing. "What the hell?" I muttered. Confused, I knocked on the door loudly. Someone had to be home. A few moments later, the door opened, and there stood Lauren, her eyes widening in surprise. She wore an apron, flour dusting her hands, like she'd been baking. "Rachel?" she said, blinking at me. "What are you doing here?" I frowned, gripping the handle of my suitcase. "What do you mean?" "I live here." Lauren's expression shifted. Her eyes darted toward the living room, where Dad and Olivia sat. Dad was in his favorite chair, Mom's old chair, reading his tablet. Olivia was sprawled on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Both of them looked equally startled to see me. "What's going on?" I asked, stepping inside. A sense of unease settled in my stomach. Dad set his tablet down and rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he'd always had. Yeah, I changed the locks last month. For safety, there were some break-ins in the neighborhood." I narrowed my eyes. "You could have told me, or sent me a new key." Lauren crossed her arms, her stance suddenly tense. "We weren't expecting you. Something was wrong. Why not?" I asked, my voice growing sharper. "I graduated last week. I told you I was coming home." Silence. I looked between them, my unease growing into something heavier. Olivia had even put down her phone, watching with an odd expression. Dad sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Rachel, can we talk? In the office?" I followed him, my pulse pounding in my ears. Something was very, very wrong, and I was about to find out just how deep the betrayal went. I followed Dad into the office, my heart pounding. Something about this whole situation felt off, and I was about to find out why. The room still had traces of Mom, her framed degrees on the wall, her collection of financial books neatly arranged on the shelves. But somehow, it didn't feel like hers anymore. I turned to face Dad, arms crossed. "Okay, what's going on?" Dad hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Rachel, listen. Lauren, she thinks the house belongs to me." My stomach dropped. "What?" He sighed, not meeting my eyes. "I told her I gave the house to your mother after the divorce, that she was only living here because I allowed it, and that after she passed, it reverted back to me." I stared at him, waiting for him to say it was a joke, that he was just messing with me. But the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. "You lied to her," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Dad finally looked at me, guilt written all over his face. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I wanted to make things easier." "For who?" I snapped. "Because it sure as hell wasn't for me. I was going to tell her the truth," he insisted. "I just needed more time to figure out how." I let out a humorless laugh. "So, what? You thought you could just keep lying until it magically became true?" "Rachel, please," he begged. "I'll fix this. Just give me a little time." A little time? He had 4 years to fix this. 4 years to tell Lauren the truth. And now, when I was supposed to move back home, he was still making excuses. "I have to tell her," I said, turning toward the door. Dad caught my arm. "No, please. Let me handle this." His desperation only fueled my anger. "Handle it? Dad, I was locked out of my own house. Lauren thinks I'm some freeloader trying to barge in uninvited. How do you expect me to just stand here and let you handle it?" He pulled a key from his pocket and held it out. I had extra keys made. "Here, just let me figure out how to tell her without ruining my marriage." I stared at the key in his hand, disgust twisting in my gut. This wasn't just about Lauren. This was about him. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting himself. I snatched the key and yanked open the door. Lauren was standing right outside, arms crossed, suspicion all over her face. "What's going on?" Dad shot me a pleading look, but I was done protecting his lies. "This is my house," I said, my voice steady. "My mom bought it before she even met Dad. She left it to me in her will. It was never his." Lauren's face twisted in confusion, then realization, then pure white-hot rage. She turned on Dad. "You told me this was yours." Dad swallowed hard. "Lauren, you lied to me?" she hissed. Dad stammered, searching for an excuse, but it was too late. Lauren stormed out of the room, calling for Olivia. "Get your things," she snapped. "We're leaving." I followed her into the living room. "You don't have to leave," I said, though I wasn't sure why I even bothered. "I just want my house back." Lauren spun around, eyes blazing. "Are you serious?" You expect us to just stay here like nothing happened? I expect you to respect that this is my home, I shot back. She let out a bitter laugh. Respect? You blindsided me. You let me believe this was our house for years. That wasn't my lie, I said, throwing a glare at Dad. Lauren scoffed, then turned to Olivia. Come on. Olivia hesitated, looking between me and her mother. Wait, where are we going? Lauren grabbed her purse, her movements sharp with fury. I'll figure it out. Dad, ever the coward, just stood there, rubbing his temples. Lauren, please, let's talk about this. But she wasn't listening. She grabbed Olivia's hand and marched toward the front door. Then she stopped, her voice eerily calm. You know what? I should have seen this coming. You were always on Rachel's side, always treating her like she was more important than me and Olivia. She turned to me, eyes narrowing. Congratulations. You win. Then she was gone, slamming the door behind her. The house was suddenly too quiet. I turned to Dad. Well, that went well, he sighed, sinking into a chair. I really messed up, didn't I? I folded my arms. Yeah, you did. He was silent for a long time before finally looking up at me. I don't know what to do now. I shrugged. Figure it out. Like you should have 4 years ago. I walked out of the room, leaving him alone with his regrets. For the first time in years, my house finally felt like mine again. The house was eerily quiet after Lauren and Olivia left. It should have felt like a victory, but all I felt was exhaustion. I had spent 4 years believing my home was in good hands, only to come back and find out I'd been erased from it. Dad sat slumped in a chair, staring at the floor like his entire life had crumbled. Maybe it had. I didn't care. I should have. But I didn't. You should go too, I told him, leaning against the doorframe. His head snapped up. Rachel, please, no. I crossed my arms, standing firm. I don't trust you. You lied to me. You let them treat me like an outsider in my own home. You made me feel like I was intruding. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. I was trying to keep the peace. By lying? By locking me out of my own house? My voice rose, anger finally boiling over. What was your plan, Dad? To keep the lie going forever? To hope I just stayed away? I never wanted that, he muttered. But even he didn't sound convinced. Then what did you want? He had no answer. I sighed, exhausted. Look, you made your choice. You put them first. You lied to keep them happy. And now, it's time for you to leave. He stared at me for a long moment. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the regret, the guilt. But it was too late for that. Finally, he stood up. I'll pack my things. I nodded. Good. It took him less than an hour to gather his belongings. He didn't have much, just a few suitcases, some boxes. I watched as he carried them to his car, silent the entire time. Before he got in, he turned to me. Rachel, I know I messed up, and I know you probably don't want to hear it, but I really am sorry. I didn't respond. I just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for him to leave. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I hope one day you'll forgive me. Then he got in his car and drove away. And just like that, I was alone. The first few days were strange. The house felt hollow. I hadn't lived here full-time in 4 years, and everything felt both familiar and foreign. Some things were just as I left them: my old bedroom, the attic where I stored Mom's things, but the rest of the house had been changed. Lauren's furniture, Lauren's decorations, Lauren's presence still lingered in every room. I couldn't stand it. So I started undoing it. I spent the weekend moving things back to how they used to be. I put Mom's favorite vase back on the mantle. I replaced the curtains with the ones she picked out years ago. I dug through the attic, pulling out framed photos, old blankets, little pieces of her that had been shoved away. By Sunday night, it finally felt like home again. But as much as I tried to focus on the house, there was one thing I couldn't shake: what Lauren had said before she left. You were always on Rachel's side, always treating her like she was more important than me and Olivia. It stuck with me. Had Dad really thought of me as more important? It sure didn't feel like it. If anything, he had gone out of his way to push me aside. But maybe, in some twisted way, he had been trying to keep both sides happy, me and Lauren. Maybe he thought he was doing the right thing. It didn't excuse anything, but it made me wonder if he really had regretted it all along. I didn't know if that mattered. A week later, I was settling into my new job when Dad called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want?" I said as soon as I picked up. There was a pause. Then I found a place. I leaned back in my chair. "Okay, it's small," he admitted. "Nothing like the house. But it's mine." I didn't know what to say to that. I could picture him in some tiny apartment, alone, trying to rebuild his life. Part of me wanted to feel bad for him. The other part of me thought, "This is the life you chose." "I just wanted you to know," he said when I didn't respond. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thanks for letting me know." Another pause. Then, softer, "I miss you, Rachel." I closed my eyes. "Goodbye, Dad." I hung up. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be, but for now, I had my house. I had my life. And that was enough. Days turned into weeks, and little by little, the house felt like mine again. I got rid of everything Lauren had added: the throw pillows, the tacky wall art, the scented candles that always smelled too sweet. I repainted the walls back to their original color, put Mom's books back on the shelves, and rearranged the furniture until it finally felt right. It wasn't just about undoing what Lauren had done. It was about reclaiming the space that was rightfully mine. But the thing about reclaiming something is that it forces you to confront the past. One afternoon, I found myself in the attic, surrounded by boxes of Mom's old things. I hadn't touched most of them since she died. It had been too painful back then, and once I left for college, I told myself I'd go through them when I was ready. I wasn't sure if I'd ever truly be ready. Still, I opened the first box. The scent of old paper and fabric filled the air as I pulled out a faded sweater, one I remembered her wearing when she'd make tea on rainy afternoons. My chest tightened. I set it aside carefully and continued. There were photo albums, birthday cards, letters she had written but never sent. Then, at the bottom of the box, I found a folder. It was thick, filled with legal documents. My heart pounded as I flipped through them: bank statements, the house deed, Mom's will. I had seen most of it before, but now I read everything more carefully. One page stood out, a letter Mom had written to me but never gave me. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Rachel, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer here. I wish I could have had this conversation with you in person, but I want you to know that everything I've done has been to make sure you have a safe place to call home. This house is yours. Not just in legal terms, but in every way that matters. It's the place where we laughed, where we cried, where we lived. I hope it brings you comfort, not pain. I know your father will always find a way to disappoint you. I'm sorry for that. I wish I could protect you from it. But no matter what he says, no matter what happens, never doubt this. You belong here. You always have. You always will. I love you." I clutched the letter to my chest, my throat tightening. She knew. She knew Dad would let me down. And she had done everything in her power to make sure I wouldn't lose the one thing she could still give me. A mix of grief and anger settled in my chest. I had spent so many years hoping deep down that Dad would prove me wrong, that he'd finally put me first. But Mom had known better. She had known him better. I wiped my face and folded the letter carefully, placing it in my nightstand. I wasn't ready to let it go. With the house back in order, I turned my focus to work. My new job at the investment firm was going well. The workload was intense, but I liked it. It kept my mind occupied. My coworkers were friendly enough, and I had even started forming a friendship with Sarah, the woman from the risk assessment team who had shown me around on my first day. "You seem less stressed this week," she said over lunch one day. "Finally settling in?" I nodded, taking a sip of my iced coffee. "Yeah, it's been a weird adjustment, but I think I'm getting there." She tilted her head. "Weird how?" I hesitated. I wasn't in the habit of sharing personal details with people. I barely knew, but something about Sarah made me feel like I could. "I moved back into my mom's house," I admitted. My dad and his wife had been living there while I was in college, and let's just say, things got messy when I came back. Her eyebrows raised. "Messy how?" I sighed. "They changed the locks. Acted like I didn't belong there." Sarah's eyes widened. "No way. That's insane." "Yeah," I said, stabbing at my salad with my fork. "I had to kick them out." She let out a low whistle. "Damn, good for you." I gave a small smile. "Thanks. It felt nice. talking about it with someone who didn't know my history, someone who didn't try to justify Dad's actions or tell me to be the bigger person. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. But of course, peace never lasts. One evening, I was curled up on the couch with a book when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, Dad's number. I ignored it. A few seconds later, another buzz. A voicemail. I sighed, debating whether to listen. Eventually, curiosity won. I pressed play. Rachel, it's me. Look, I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need your help. I frowned. I wouldn't be asking if it wasn't serious. Just please call me back. It's about Olivia. My stomach twisted. Olivia. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore the pang of guilt that crept up. She was just a kid. She hadn't been the one to lie to me, to manipulate me. But she had still stood by her mother's side, rolling her eyes at me, treating me like I was the enemy. I hesitated for a long moment before finally calling him back. He picked up on the first ring. Rachel? What's wrong? I asked, skipping the pleasantries. Dad sighed. Lauren kicked me out. I blinked. What? She's filing for divorce. She doesn't want me staying at the apartment anymore. I pinched the bridge of my nose. And what does that have to do with Olivia? She's upset. She doesn't understand why her mom is so angry. And he hesitated. She wants to see you. That caught me off guard. Why? She misses you, he said softly. She's been asking about you ever since we left. I swallowed hard. I had spent weeks trying to erase them from my life, trying to move forward. But Olivia wasn't the one who had betrayed me. She was just a kid caught in the middle. I don't know, Dad, I said, my voice uncertain. Please, Rachel, he pleaded. She looks up to you. She needs you right now. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. This wasn't about Dad. It wasn't about Lauren. It was about Olivia. And no matter how much I wanted to shut the door on this chapter of my life, I wasn't sure I could turn my back on her. I'll think about it, I finally said. Dad exhaled in relief. Thank you. I hung up, staring at my phone. I wasn't sure if I was making a mistake, but for Olivia's sake, I had to find out. I spent the next few days trying to ignore Dad's request, but it clung to me like a shadow. Olivia wanted to see me. Why now? For weeks, she had acted like I was the enemy, following Lauren's lead, treating me like an outsider in my own home. And now, after everything fell apart, she suddenly wanted me back in her life? Still, I couldn't shake the thought of her being caught in the middle of a divorce she didn't ask for. One afternoon, after overthinking it to death, I finally texted Dad, "Where is Olivia staying?" He responded almost immediately, "Lauren's place, but I can pick her up anytime." I hesitated before typing, "I'll meet you both at the park tomorrow. 4 p.m. A simple, neutral location. Nothing too personal." "Thank you," Dad replied. I ignored it. The next day, I sat on a bench at the park, nervously tapping my foot against the pavement. Kids ran past me, their laughter echoing through the air, but my focus was on the parking lot. At exactly 4 p.m., Dad's car pulled in. I expected Olivia to look different, maybe colder, more distant. But when she climbed out of the car, she looked just like I remembered, except now, her eyes were puffy, like she'd been crying. She hesitated when she saw me. I forced a small smile. "Hey," she swallowed, glancing at Dad before walking over. "Hi." Awkward silence stretched between us. I motioned to the bench. "Want to sit?" She nodded and dropped onto the bench beside me, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Dad lingered for a moment. "I'll be nearby if you need me," he said before walking away. I exhaled. "So, your mom and dad?" Olivia sighed. "Yeah, it sucks." I nodded. "I bet." Another pause. She kicked at the dirt with her shoe. "She's really mad at him. She won't even let him come inside the apartment." I raised an eyebrow. "And you think that's unfair?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I mean, I get why she's mad, I guess. He lied about the house, but I didn't think she'd throw him out like that." I studied her face. She was conflicted, torn between her parents, struggling to understand something too complicated for her to process. "She probably feels betrayed," I said carefully. "She thought they built a life together, and then she found out a big part of it was a lie. That's not easy to forgive." Olivia picked at her nails. "But he's still my dad." I softened. "Yeah. And that's not gonna change." She sighed again, staring at the ground. I miss how things were before all the fighting, before you came back. I stiffened. So, you blame me? Her head snapped up. No, I don't know. At first, maybe. But now, I just feel lost. I let out a slow breath. I get that. She bit her lip. Did you ever feel that way? When your mom died? The question hit me harder than I expected. Yeah, I admitted. I felt like my whole world had been ripped apart. Like nothing made sense anymore. She nodded, silent for a moment. That's how I feel now. I glanced at her, then reached for a small rock on the bench, rolling it between my fingers. After Mom died, I kept thinking things would go back to normal. Like, one day I'd wake up and everything would feel okay again. I paused, but it never did. Not in the way I wanted. Olivia looked at me, waiting. I had to make a new normal, I said. It took a long time, and it wasn't easy. But eventually, I found a way to move forward. She was quiet for a while before asking, how do you do that? I thought about it. I started by figuring out what really mattered to me. Who really mattered? She stared at the ground, absorbing my words. I don't think my mom wants me to see Dad anymore. That didn't surprise me. Lauren was probably furious at Dad, at me, at everything, but I wasn't going to get in the middle of that battle. That's something you have to figure out for yourself, I said. No one can make that choice for you. She looked at me again, eyes filled with uncertainty. But you're not mad at me, right? I sighed, rubbing my temple. Olivia, I won't lie. It hurt when you treated me like I didn't belong. Like I was the problem. She flinched. But I also know you were just following your mom's lead, I continued. You didn't really understand what was happening. I get it. You're a kid, and this is messy. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm sorry. I let out a slow breath. I know. She sniffled, wiping her face with the sleeve of her hoodie. Can we still be sisters? My chest tightened. I wasn't sure how to answer that, because the truth was, I didn't know if I could ever fully trust Olivia again. But I also knew she was just a kid caught in the middle of something she didn't ask for. Maybe she didn't deserve to be shut out completely. So, I reached out and squeezed her hand. We'll figure it out. She smiled, a small, hopeful smile. And for the first time since I'd come back home, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. For the first time in weeks, I felt lighter. Olivia and I weren't magically fixed, but at least there was a bridge between us now. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Dad walked over as Olivia wiped the last of her tears away. He looked at me hesitantly, like he wasn't sure if he should say anything. She's ready to go, I said, standing up. Olivia turned to me. Can I text you? I nodded. Yeah. A small, relieved smile spread across her face before she headed toward the car. Dad lingered. Rachel, I shook my head. Don't push it. He sighed but didn't argue. Instead, he nodded and followed Olivia to the car. I watched them drive away, my chest tight with something I couldn't quite name. Over the next couple of weeks, Olivia kept her word. She texted every now and then, small things mostly. A meme that made her laugh. A picture of her latest painting. It was weird at first, but I didn't mind. It was nice to talk to her without the weight of Lauren or Dad looming over us. But Dad? That was different. He called twice after the park meeting. I let them both go to voicemail. The first was just him checking in, but the second hit differently. Rachel, I know you don't want to hear from me. I get it, but I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. You built a life for yourself. You stood up for yourself. I wasn't the father you deserved, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I just hope someday you'll let me try. I didn't know what to do with that. For years, I had waited for him to say something like that, but now that he had, it didn't fix anything. It didn't change the fact that he had lied to me, that he had made me feel like a guest in my own home, that he had let Lauren treat me like a burden. People love to say I'm sorry when they have nothing left to lose. So I didn't call back. One Friday evening, I got home from work and collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. It had been a long week, and I was looking forward to doing absolutely nothing all weekend. But then my phone buzzed. Olivia, hey, can I ask you something? I frowned. Of course. A few seconds later, another text popped up. Did you ever forgive Dad for leaving you when you were little? I sat up. That wasn't what I expected. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I thought I did. But now, I don't know. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Mom says I should just forget about him. I exhaled slowly. I could picture Lauren saying that, trying to erase Dad from Olivia's life the same way she had tried to erase me from my own home. I hesitated before typing, "You don't have to make that decision right now, and you don't have to listen to what anyone else says. You get to decide what kind of relationship you want with him." There was a long pause before she responded. Did it hurt? I swallowed hard. Yeah, a lot. More dots. Then, but you're okay now, right? I stared at the screen for a long time before finally replying, "Yeah, I am." Because I was. I had my home back, my life back. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I was moving forward. The following weekend, I woke up to the smell of coffee brewing. For half a second, I expected to walk downstairs and see Mom in the kitchen, humming while she poured herself a cup. But when I reached the bottom of the stairs, it was just me. And that was okay. I poured my coffee and stepped onto the porch, letting the morning breeze wash over me. The garden was blooming again. The house was mine again. I thought about Olivia, about Dad. I didn't know what the future held for them. Maybe one day I'd find it in me to hear Dad out. Maybe Olivia and I would grow closer. Or maybe not. But either way, I was done waiting for people to prove their love to me. Mom had already done that. She had made sure I would always have a home. And that was enough. Story 2. Laura is my name. I thought I had everything worked out. An excellent position as a large company's deputy head of finance. A little boy and a spouse. We were comfortable, but not wealthy. That was my initial idea anyhow. Tom, my spouse, was employed in the field of electronic sales. His earnings were scattered everywhere. He would bring home a hefty payday in certain months. He would hardly get by with others. However, we managed to make it work. We had been saving for a home for 7 years. I was determined, even if it wasn't easy. Every extra cent was deposited into our savings. Instead of eating out, I would cook at home, buy generic brands, and clip coupons. Sometimes Tom complained, but I believed he understood. On a Sunday afternoon, everything went apart. We were looking through web classifieds for a property once more. Tom's eyes brightened as he pointed at the television. "Laura, have a look at this. It's flawless." Leaning in, I looked. It was lovely. It was large, contemporary, and had a large backyard, I had to concede. However, my heart fell when I saw the price tag. "We can't afford that, Tom. It's much beyond our means." I thought he would say that and go on. This conversation was nothing new to us, but something inside him exploded this time. "We can't afford it, of course." He slammed his laptop shut and yelled, "We'll never be able to afford anything. Save, save, save is all you do." Now he stood up and paced the room. For the home, for Jimmy's schooling. However, where is the reward? When will we be able to truly appreciate life? "Hey, Tom, relax." No, I'm not going to relax. I'm over this. Laura, I've had enough of pinching pennies. I'm tired of being nowhere. Good. I'm tired of dressing the same way every year. I'm worthy of better. Both a better life and a better wife are things I deserve. I felt like I was slapped across the face by his words. Tears were stinging my eyes and burning my cheeks, but I forced myself to swallow and kept my eyes closed. "Please, Tom," I said, attempting to sound calm. "Simply inhale deeply. We must exercise patience. Our savings are nearly there. Just relax and let's discuss this." I hoped my words would calm him down and allow us to talk logically. However, I was mistaken. Anger twisted Tom's face, and without saying another word, he bounded out of the room, slamming the door so forcefully that the window shook. I believed that things would improve. However, I couldn't have been more mistaken after Tom's outburst. Tom returned home the following day with a brand new smartwatch and shopping bags full of high-end clothing. I looked at him, perplexed. "Why all this?" I inquired. With a defiant gleam in his eye, he shrugged, "Simply taking care of myself." "Do you have an issue with that?" I refrained from speaking. I don't want to start a new argument, but things only got worse over the course of the following few weeks. Tom began spending all of his money on upscale dining establishments, pricey technology, and get-togethers with his friends. I was unable to contain myself one evening as he was leaving in a new suit. "What about our savings, Tom? The home?" His face was hard as he turned to face me. "Laura, life is too short. I'm done saving for some future that might never come. I want to live now." "But what about Jimmy's education?" I pushed. Tom scoffed. "My parents didn't pay for my education, and I turned out fine. He can get loans or scholarships. Besides, we can keep renting. No need to waste money on a house." I felt like I was talking to a stranger. This wasn't the man I married. As the weeks turned into months, Tom's behavior got more and more outrageous. He started staying out late nearly every night on weekends. He'd suddenly have business trips, something that had never happened before in all his years at the company. And when he was home, it was like living with a constant critic. Nothing I did was right anymore. "Do you have to choose so loudly?" he'd snap at dinner. "That dress makes you look frumpy." He'd say as I got ready for work, "Can't you keep the house cleaner?" He'd complain, tossing his dirty socks on the floor. Every day I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller under his constant barrage of criticism. I tried talking to him, tried to understand what had changed, but he'd just rolled his eyes and walk away. 6 months. 6 long, miserable months of this new reality. I barely recognized my life anymore. The warm, loving home I thought we had built together had turned cold and hostile. Finally, one night I'd had enough. Tom had just finished tearing into me about the dinner I'd cooked, a meal that used to be his favorite. "Tom," I said, my voice quiet but firm, "I think we need to live separately for a while." I expected argument, maybe even remorse. What I didn't expect was the look of relief that washed over his face. "Yeah," he said, nodding. "I think that's a good idea." His easy agreement felt like a punch to the gut, but it also confirmed what I'd been fearing for months. The man I loved, the life we built together, was already gone. The days after Tom left were a strange mix of loneliness and peace. I told myself this separation was temporary, that Tom would understand what he was missing, confront the hard truths of life on his own, and return back appreciating what we made together. I was very naive. It was a Tuesday evening when my phone started vibrating incessantly. At first, I disregarded it, focusing on assisting Jimmy with his schoolwork, but as the messages continued arriving, I decided to check. The instant I opened my social networking app, my heart stopped beating. There, at the top of my feed, came a photo that devastated my world. On a boat stood my spouse, Tom. His arm was wrapped around a lovely blonde with legs that appeared to stretch on forever. They were both beaming, the blue water extending out behind them. But it was the caption that truly had me starting a new life. I fled to the kitchen, my hands shaking as I browsed through the comments. Friends, relatives, coworkers. The same question was being asked by everyone. With whom is that woman? Tom? Then 5 days after the picture was published, someone knocked on the door. When I opened it, I saw Tom standing there, looking happier than I had seen him in years and tanned. He brushed by me and entered the home, saying, "We need to talk." With my pulse racing, I followed him into the living room. "What's happening, Tom?" The woman in the picture was who? With a sneer that made my stomach spin, he turned to face me. "That's my girlfriend, Vanessa." It seemed like the room was spinning. "A girlfriend? However, we are wed. We're simply not together." "We? Hurry up, Laura," he interrupted me. "Let's not act as though our marriage has long since ended. Me and Vanessa. It's been 6 months since we started dating. 6 months." The timetable made sense. His abrupt behavioral shift. The business travels, the late hours, I was ill, she's wealthy. Ignoring my amusement and concern, Tom went on. "She is neither frugal or preoccupied with saving money. Today is her life. Plus," he continued, grinning cruelly, "she is far more fascinating and attractive than you. Vanessa is the woman I wish to wed. Make a new beginning." Slowly, I nodded. I suddenly understood that our marriage had ended long before this discussion. Perhaps it had ended when he shut the door 6 months prior. "All right," I said, sounding more composed than I actually was. "We will obtain a divorce if it is what you desire." Tom was taken aback, as though he had anticipated a brawl, but I was finished battling when he walked away. I collapsed into the couch, already on the phone with his lawyer. The divorce process was a haze of legalese and paperwork. I agreed to share custody of Jimmy with Tom. I wanted Jimmy to grow up with both of his parents, in spite of the catastrophe our marriage had become. However, I was far from okay even after the divorce was official. The abrupt disruption of my entire existence, the public humiliation, and the treachery. Everything struck me like a ton of bricks. I was having trouble getting out of bed in the morning and was finding it difficult to concentrate at work. I made the decision to visit a therapist at that point. An elderly woman with lovely eyes. Dr. Reynolds was compassionate. "What you're experiencing is normal, Laura," she stated during our first session. "Even if you've gone through a serious event, the first step toward recovery is that you're here." My lifeline was those sessions. With the assistance of Dr. Reynolds, the first gradually began to work through my feelings and realized that Tom's actions were motivated by him and not by me. I forced myself to get better and move on for Jimmy's sake. I put all of my energy into my work, began working out, and even joined a support group for women who had divorced. PIP. I imagine I could feel myself waking up from the haze of despair. Then Tom wed Vanessa. I made an effort to be pleased for Jimmy. It seems that he liked her sufficiently. However, things began to shift. It started out innocently enough. Tom requested that Jimmy stay here for the weekend. One more day there, in an effort to support their relationship. I consented, but those weekends quickly became weeks. "Don't you want to spend more time at home, Jimmy?" I asked you once. Without looking at me, he shrugged. "It's more fun at Dad's house." That ought to have been my first red flag, but I ignored it since I believed that a boy's need to spend time with his father was normal. But Jimmy spent less and less time with me as the months passed. He was unusual, aloof, and always appeared to have new toys, clothing, and tales of thrilling travels and experiences when he did return home. At last, following another weekend in which Jimmy pleaded to remain at his father's house, I sat him down to speak with him. "What's going on, honey? Do you no longer like being here?" Jimmy shifted around. "My eyes are still not meeting. Only Mom and Dad are there. Permit me to do what I like." "Mom?" Confused, I repeated. "Yes, Vanessa. She constantly gets me wonderful items. We visit upscale dining establishments and amusement parks. It's far more enjoyable than this place." His remarks were akin to a face slap. "You know we can't afford it, Jimmy. That's the issue," he exploded. "Money should never be spent on enjoyable activities. Dad thinks that you're trapped in the past and always worry about the future rather than living in the now. It's always saving this budget." After then, things rapidly got out of control. Jimmy began to completely refuse to return home. When he did, he would continually gripe and disparage my little house in comparison to Tom and Vanessa's opulent way of life. The last blow was delivered on a soggy Tuesday. I had been pleading with Jimmy to join me for supper for days. Upon his arrival, he scowled after taking a quick glance around our living room. "God, this home is so much smaller than Dad's house that it feels like a village barn. I no longer wish to reside here." Each one was swept by the mud more forcefully than the last. I watched from the sidelines as my kid got older, growing more away each time I tried to connect with him. I encountered either apathy or blatant animosity. Then the day arrived, shattering what remained of my world. Jimmy turned 14 on that day. Maybe stupidly, I had thought he would want to spend it with me. Rather, I received a call that completely altered my life. "Mom," Jimmy spoke in a chilly, disinterested tone. "I need to discuss something essential with you." Neutral Ground is a coffee house where we first met. Jimmy, who sat across from me, didn't look like my son at all. Then he revealed the secret. His voice was steady as he said, "I want you to give up your parental rights. The NSA is interested in adopting me." It seemed as though someone had hit me in the stomach. "What?" "I am now your mother, Jimmy," he interrupted me. "My mother is Vanessa. She has supported me. She knows me. I can have the life I desire with her and my father." After hesitating, he continued, "She is unable to bear children of her own. Legally, I would like to be her son." As Jimmy explained their strategy, I sat there in disbelief. A lawyer had previously been consulted by Vanessa and Tom. My signature was all they need. Tom and Vanessa put forth a lot of effort over the following few weeks. Tom was reveling in triumph. I wanted to cling to my son by fighting every maternal urge in me. But glancing at Jimmy's face, Seeing the resolve there, I knew it would just push him further away with a sorrowful heart. I signed the paperwork. The finality of it devastated me. I slid into a severe despair. If it hadn't been for my mother, I'm not sure I would have lived. She forced me to eat, get out of bed, and continue living when she moved in with me. Painfully and slowly, I began to reconstruct my life. I started helping at a nearby animal shelter and put myself into my work. Anything to cover Jimmy's absence's emptiness. I met David 3 years after the divorce. He was patient, compassionate, and accomplished. As I told him my tale, he listened and offered encouragement without passing judgment. I astonished myself by accepting David's proposal. I was both happy and sad as we exchanged vows. Perhaps this was my destiny, even though it wasn't the life I had intended. I found out I was pregnant right when I thought I had my new life sorted out. As I recalled the kid I had lost, the news struck me like a tidal rush of emotions, including excitement, terror, delight, and a slight tinge of grief. David was ecstatic. Though he had never had the opportunity, he had always desired children. We converted a room in our new home into a nursery as we immersed ourselves into getting ready for the baby. Oh, the home. It fulfilled every desire I had ever had. Additionally, it was larger, with a lovely garden and a view that amazed me every morning. I kept thinking about how different this was from my previous life as I stood in the kitchen with my palm resting on my expanding tummy. I made an effort to ignore Jimmy. I kept monitoring his social media profiles, even though he never phoned or responded to my messages. I initially convinced myself that it was only to check on him. However, I became more uneasy as I browsed through pictures of extravagant parties, pricey automobiles, and far-flung trips. A young man who seemed to place a higher priority on riches and prestige than anything else had replaced the carefree youngster I had reared. As he wrote about peasants who couldn't buy fancy clothing or grumbled about having to socialize with regular people at gatherings, I watched with sadness. When he went on a tirade about how people under him shouldn't be let in particular clubs that day, it was the last straw, and my eyes watering. His accounts were unfollowed. The sight of what he had become was too painful. After several months, our daughter Emily was born. I gazed upon her little face. I made a quiet vow to her that I would always be there for her. I will never allow anyone to take her away. We began going on family vacations as Emily grew. Simple weekend trips to the beach or neighboring cities, nothing fancy. I like seeing Emily's eyes brighten as she saw something new. As David swung her around in the surf, I could hear her happy laughs. A contented regularity took hold of life. I had nearly forgotten what it was like to be on edge all the time, constantly preoccupied with money or the next dispute. I felt secure with David and Emily, cherished, content. Then came the day that completely upended everything once more. The Saturday afternoon was bright and beautiful. I was taking advantage of a rare period of silence when David took Emily to the entertainment center for some daddy-daughter time. We're reading in our living room to catch up. I was startled when the doorbell rang. We didn't anticipate any guests. I went to answer it curiously. My heart stopped the instant I opened the door. Jimmy was there at my door, appearing older and strangely both familiar and unfamiliar. He had grown taller. His childlike features turned into a young man's sharpness. He had on a fancy outfit. Glistening on his wrist was a gold watch. I was drawn to his gaze, though. They were very different from the warm brown eyes in that they were hard calculating, I recalled. His voice was deeper than I recalled when he said, "Hey, Mom. It's been a while." I was speechless and stood still. Jimmy looked past me, admiring the foyer's lofty ceilings and tasteful furnishings. He blew a soft whistle. "Well, this is a lovely sight for you. You seem to be doing rather well for yourself." His voice was informal, almost derisive. A shiver went down my back. "Jimmy?" At last I was able to stutter. "Why are you here? How did you discover me?" With a sneer on his lips, he shrugged. Grandma informed me. "Do not be concerned. It took a lot of effort on my part to pull it out of her. She guards you very carefully." I mentally noted that I needed to thank my mother later and have a serious conversation with her about setting limits. "May I enter?" As he swept past me and entered the home, Jimmy questioned without waiting for a response. Jimmy strolled in and flopped down on our immaculate white couch as if he owned the space while I stood in the living room. What took place? Why are you here, Jimmy? Trying to speak steadily, I asked. He chuckled bitterly. Mom, it's a true soap opera. My beloved old stepmother wasn't as loyal as we all believed, it turns out. Vanessa kicked us both out of the house after divorcing Dad. Is it not unbelievable? That brazen gold digger who decided she didn't need us anymore after finding a younger model. His foul language made me cringe, but he was now on a roll. I guess I placed the wrong wager. He gave me a stern look. Instead of pursuing the high life with that woman, you should have stayed with your nice, dependable mother. His remarks were painful, reliving the agony of his rejection. But he changed course before I could react. Water under the bridge, though, isn't it? You remain my mother. We need to make up a lot of lost time. He spoke in a cheerful tone, but I felt nervous because of the calculating look in his eyes. I inhaled deeply. I don't think it's that easy, Jimmy. You choose to stop having me in your life. I'm no longer your mommy legally. He dismissively waved his hand. Technicalities. For all that nonsense, blood is thicker than water. In addition, he smiled, consider the money you have saved over the past 5 years by not having to raise me. You ought to share a little of it now, don't you? And there it was. The true cause of his unexpected return to my life. I apologize, Jimmy, but I am unable to just hand you cash. I spoke aggressively. Here, I have obligations. I have to raise my daughter. Oh, you took my place, he said, interrupting with a laugh. Bitter and ugly. Ignore your firstborn and get yourself a bright new child. My rage was growing, but I forced myself to remain composed. Jimmy, it's not like that. Look, I might be able to speak with David about finding you a job if you need one. A job? He interrupted me once more with a sneer. I don't require employment. I need money. You owe me, Mama. Come on. I have nothing to repay you. My voice eventually hardened as I said, Years ago, you made your decision. I apologize. Even if you're in a difficult circumstance, I can't just give you money. All pretense of friendliness vanished as his expression darkened. You are a self-centered, overweight person. He hissed and sprang to his feet. Your father was right to abandon you. You're just a sour old woman who is more concerned with her financial account than her own son. He stormed out before I could reply, slamming the door so forcefully that a painting tumbled from the wall. My legs could no longer hold me up, so I collapsed into the couch. Great. Heaving sobs ripped through my body as tears filled my eyes and spilled over. This young man is entitled and furious. How could my Jimmy be this? What had I done wrong? Was I at fault for not putting up a stronger fight to keep him? What was this? The unavoidable outcome of the way of life that Tom and Vanessa had instilled in him? How long I sat there in tears is beyond me. I only remember that I quickly wiped my eyes as I heard David's key in the lock so as not to frighten him or Emily, but Emily was toddling next to David as soon as he entered. After glancing at my face, he realized something wasn't right. Laura, what took place? He inquired. His face was marked with concern. I glanced at my kid, then at my husband. When she saw her mother crying, her naive face looked to me in bewilderment. I decided at that very time, now, this was my family. I couldn't allow Jimmy's return ruin the life I'd established, since he had already made up his mind. My phone rang the morning following Jimmy's surprise visit. My mom was the one. She sounded excited and worried at the same time. Laura, Jimmy paid me a visit. I gave him some money since he needed it. I assumed you would be curious. He's all right. My heart fell. Don't give him any more money, Mom. The Jimmy we knew has changed. He has no desire to work. All he wants is quick cash. Make me a promise that you won't see him again. I hung up and sat with my head in my hands at the kitchen table. I knew there was more to come. My mother did indeed phone me again a few days later. Terrified this time. Jimmy had returned and demanded more cash. He grew combative, yelling and beating on the door when she refused. The final straw was that David and I got to work right away. We spent a week at my mother's place after leaving Emily with David's parents. We alternated between remaining alert and waking. On a soggy Thursday night, the confrontation we had been dreading finally materialized. Jimmy arrived yelling for money and banging on the door while visibly intoxicated. I pulled the door open. David is directly behind me. You have to go now, Jimmy. He had wild, unfocused eyes. Until I receive what is rightfully mine. He made a lunge, but David stopped him. Watch out, Jimmy muttered. If you don't give in to my demands, I'll apologize to everyone. David phoned the police at that point. Jimmy was yelling and threatening us while we waited for them to show up. In the background, my mother clutched her chest in fear. I was devastated to see how afraid and hurt she was. Jimmy was swiftly taken away and subdued by the cops when they came. I had an odd mixture of relief and melancholy as the patrol car drove away. I messaged Tom on social media later that evening in the hopes that he could assist Jimmy. Not my problem anymore was his response. Vanessa took everything and left me. I'm dealing with my own problems. Jimmy is by himself. I felt the remaining strands of my former existence finally come loose as I read his words. I went to court the following day to get a restraining order against Jimmy. I knew I had to do it to protect my family, even though it was the toughest thing I've ever done. Years went by, followed by months. Jimmy was never seen again. I would occasionally lie awake at night wondering where he was and whether he was all right. But with time, the number of those restless nights decreased. Life continued. Emily developed into a bright, inquisitive youngster. David's company was booming. I experienced a deep sense of calm one beautiful day as I watched David push Emily on the swing in our backyard. Now this was my life. Not flawless, but full of pleasure, laughing, and love. Story 3. My narrative starts in a house that never felt like home. My name is Robin. My father was a manager in a trade firm, and my mother was a successful dentist at a private clinic. Dad moved in with Mom after they were married. When I arrived a year later, everything appeared to be going well. Dad arrived home early one day. Anger distorted his face. He tossed his suitcase onto the couch and declared, "I quit. That jerk can find someone else to intimidate." Weeks became months, and days became weeks. The click-clack of Dad's game controller and the sound of the TV filled the home. The beer odor permeated every moment. I wasn't blind, but I was young. When Mom returned home to discover Dad sprawled on the sofa with empty cans all around him, I could see how her grin clenched. "Mom would tell you to get a job, John." She spoke in a strained tone. "I am searching. Sarah, what are you looking for from me?" Dad would respond with a shout. "Nothing that fits my pay grade and skill set is available." They started arguing every night. During their worst arguments, I would hide in my room with a pillow over my ears and try to drown out their irate voices. I would be taken to Lisa's house by Mom, lived with my cousin Tommy, who was a few years younger than me, and my Uncle Mark, only a 15-minute drive away. I had a great time at their house. There was always laughter and warmth. Tommy and I would learn how to play board games from Uncle Mark, and Lisa would make cookies that would fill the house with the aroma of vanilla and chocolate. "Sweetheart, you're always welcome here." At night, Lisa would tuck me in and whisper to me. Regardless, a lifeline was provided by those words. I loved my parents just as much. Being at Atlas's felt more like home than my own house ever did. I once heard Mom and Lisa conversing in the kitchen, following a particularly nasty argument. Mom cried, "I don't know how much longer I can do this, Lisa, but I must make an effort." For Robin's benefit, I wanted to let her know that she was not required to, that I wouldn't mind if they broke up, but I couldn't get the words out of my throat. I was just a kid after all. What did I know about marriage and love? Little did I know, things were about to get a whole lot more complicated. Dad finally got a job, but it came with a catch. Lots of business trips. At first, it seemed like a blessing. When Dad was away, the house was peaceful. Mom would help me with my homework and we'd have quiet dinners together. But as the months went by, I started to notice something was off. The way Mom's face would tighten when Dad called to say he'd be away for another week. The hushed phone conversations she'd have with Lisa when she thought I couldn't hear. I was barely 8 when my world came crashing down. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, and Mom was helping me with my math homework when the doorbell rang. I remember the confusion on her face as she opened the door to a man I'd never seen before. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm Robert Hansen, John's boss," the man said, his voice tight with anger. I watched from the stairs as Mom led him into the living room. Their voices were hushed, but I could hear the tension in every word. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this," Mr. Hansen said, "but your husband has been having an affair with my wife." The ensuing hush was deafening. I saw Mom's hands start to shake. That's impossible, she muttered. John's gone on work travels. Mr. Hanson brought out an envelope. I'm afraid not. These are images of them together. The dates? Well, they line up with several of his purported work visits. I couldn't see the images from where I was, but I saw Mom's face crumble as she glanced at them. Mr. Hanson's voice softened significantly. I'm divorcing my wife, I thought. You deserve to know the truth. Do with this knowledge what you will. After he went, I saw Mom seated on the couch, tears flowing down her face as she saw me. She immediately wiped her tears. Robin, honey, I need you to go stay without Lisa for a few days, okay? She attempted to grin, but her voice was weak. Mom and Dad should have a serious conversation. As Lisa drove me to her house, I nodded, unsure of what else to do. I kept thinking about my mother's face, which was marred by tears. After several days, my mother eventually arrived to get me up. She wasn't with her father. Dad, where are you? As we drove home, I inquired. On the steering wheel, Mom's knuckles were white. Sweetheart, Dad and I will be living apart for a bit. We are divorcing each other. I had a wave of both relief and grief. It appeared for a time that things could improve. I got used to a new schedule with Mom, only the two of us. Then again, everything was different. Mom's constant fatigue was the first sign. Then she discovered a bump one day. As the doctor pronounced the word, I recall sitting in his office and clutching my mother's hand. That would permanently alter our lives. Cancer, Mom responded. We'll fight this, Robin, in a voice that was stronger than any I had ever heard. We didn't have to be alone for long, though, since my father returned to our life just when I believed he was gone. I've evolved, he stated, holding a bunch of flowers as he stood on our porch. For you both, I want to be here. In his face, I wanted to slam the door. However, Mom opened the door for him. She was too worn out, no longer afraid to fight. After Mom's diagnosis, everything became more unreal. A once organized household devolved into a maelstrom of doctors' visits, chemotherapy treatments, and Dad's attempts to take on the role of carer. One day, with a medal-worthy swell of his chest, Dad declared, I quit my job. Someone has to take care of you and take Sarah to her therapy. Robin. I wanted to think he was real. Yes, I did. However, I was able to see through his act even at the age of 9. With Dad only caring to tidy when Mom was supposed to return from the hospital, the house became more and more disorganized every day. Please, Robin, clean up a little. Without barely raising his head from his phone, he would inquire, Tomorrow, your mother will return home. I tried my hardest. However, what exactly was a 9-year-old capable of? Laundry spilt over, dishes stacked up, and dust collected everywhere. I didn't want to add to Mom's anxieties, but I wanted to advise her to get help. I heard Lisa speaking softly to Uncle Mark one day. That bastard, can you believe it? She gave a hiss. He persisted. He lost his job. He was fired by his boss for having an affair with his wife. My heart fell. It was just one more falsehood in a long line of lies. Then the day arrived, shattering what little trust I still had in my father. Abe. I was being driven home early by Lisa. Dad was meant to be waiting for me while Mom was in the hospital for another round of chemotherapy. Without knocking, we entered the home. As we remained still in the corridor, Lisa's face became red with rage, and the sound of laughs and creaking bed springs filled the air. She yelled, Get your ass out here now, John Thompson. Dad hurriedly zipped up his trousers and staggered out of the bedroom. A lady who I knew to be Mr. Hanson's ex-wife appeared behind him, holding a sheet to her chest. Lisa? Dad stated in a gratingly informal tone. You're ahead of schedule. Lisa was also trembling with anger. You dare! You're here as your wife fights for her life. Your father simply grinned. Lisa, hurry up. Sarah is ill. Men have needs. Lisa started to rant again, but Dad interrupted her because I was feeling nauseous. With an abruptly icy tone, he replied, You won't tell Sarah about this. It would just exacerbate her illness. That's the last thing you want on your conscience, would you? Lisa's face also became white. She took hold of my hand and dragged me from the home. I'm so sorry that you had to witness it, she whispered. Robin, as we drove off. Your dad? He's not a decent guy. I felt them as I nodded. I understand, I muttered. I no longer adore him. I lived under continual strain for the next year. I used to go to school and act like nothing was wrong. When I visited my mother in the hospital, I would hold her hand and tell her about my day, being sure to leave out any mention of my father. Then the call came one chilly fall morning. Mom had left. In a world that suddenly made no sense, I felt as though I was drowning and struggling to breathe. Dad just stood there, appearing almost relieved, as Lisa held me while I cried. The most difficult day of my life was the day we buried Mom. As they dropped her casket into the earth, I stood there feeling hollow and numb, sniffling and wiping his tears with a handkerchief. Dad put on quite a show. We had a meeting with Mom's attorney a week following the funeral. The lawyer cleared his throat and started reading to my dear daughter Robin, as I sat there plucking at a stray thread on my black dress. I leave everything of my material belongings, including our family home and all of my savings, he declared. The room fell quiet. I was perplexed when I looked up and saw my father's face becoming an ugly purple. What on earth? He blew up. That isn't possible. Her husband is me. The attorney adjusted his spectacles. Mr. Thompson, I'm afraid it's all pretty obvious. Everything is inherited by your daughter. When she becomes 18, she will be allowed to oversee the property. Dad turned to face Lisa, who was seated next to me. You? He growled. Did you put her through this? Poisoned her in my face. Lisa only gazed at him, her eyes icy. John, Sarah knew you. You underestimated how well she knew you. Dad continued to yell for the following 2 days after we left the office. He hardly gave me a glance, as if I were the one who had deceived him. However, I was too consumed by my sorrow to give a damn. The 3 months passed slowly. One afternoon, I was in my room looking through an old photo book when I heard strange laughing coming from the downstairs. I snuck down out of curiosity to see my dad in the living room with a woman I knew too well. Robin, the ex-wife of Mr. Hanson, was his mistress, Dad stated in a phony, upbeat tone. Come have some goodies. She will now be residing with us. Candy faked a big smile at me. Hello, dear. From now on, you should refer to me as Mum, all right? It seemed as though someone had hit me in the stomach. She's not my mum. I spit out. Candy went on a rampage in our home over the course of the following several days. As she packed up all of Mom's pictures, her trinkets, and everything that made the house seem like home, I watched in helplessness and rage. As she pushed another box of Mom's belongings into the attic, she ignored my gaze and chirped, We need to make room for our new family. Clinging to what little pictures I had left of my mother, I withdrew to my room. The final traces of my mother's existence were all about me as I sat. I promised, in silence. What used to be my home grew more and more intolerable, but I won't let them to erase Mom's existence. My gut turned as Dad and Candy settled into a lazy, indulgent existence. They were happy to live off of Candy's flat rent and the stipend that was sent into my account each month, and they never worked a day. My mother left money for me. You see, Robin? Spread out on the couch with a beer in hand, Dad would advise. The good life is this. Unlike your mother, we don't have to labor ourselves to death. Candy was no better. With shipments of clothing and cosmetics arriving nearly every day, she would spend hours buying online. She would reply, We deserve nice things, posing for yet another new gown. In the meantime, I was outgrowing my wardrobe, and every time I asked for money for new shoes, they broke. Dad would frown. Do you ever stop growing, Christ, Robin? Are you aware of the high cost of raising a teenager? They would take extravagant vacations, leaving me alone without Uncle Mark and Lisa. A part of me was glad to be away from the poisonous environment at home, but the pang of rejection was felt in another region. I came to the realization that I could no longer rely on my father as my 16th birthday drew near. I required my own funds and autonomy. At that moment, I noticed the help wanted sign on Joe's coffee shop's window. It was a brutal first shift. I'm 8 feet tall. I came home smelling like dish soap and coffee grounds, and my arms hurt from carrying trays. But for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of pride. When my first salary check arrived, I nearly burst into tears. I had it, even if it wasn't much. I had merited it. What is this? One day, Dad noticed my new phone and inquired, For that? Where do you obtain the money? I got a job, I remarked, waiting to see how he would respond. He gave a snort. A job? For what purpose do you need a job? Everything you require is provided by us? I suppressed a sour chuckle. I simply shrugged, even though they gave me the barest minimum and spent the most of my money on themselves. I needed some more money. As the months passed, I put in as many shifts as I could. I kept every dime, concealing the funds in my chamber behind a loose floorboard in a lockable box. I gradually accumulated a collection of clothing that fit, purchased school materials without begging. I gave myself little indulgences like painting materials and novels. What's more, I was creating something else: self-assurance, self-reliance, and a strong will to take charge of my life. I was rather excited as my 18th birthday drew near. So close, I could practically taste freedom. However, I had discovered that life had a way of surprising you with unexpected turns. It began with the sound of drilling and pounding. One day, when I got home from school, I saw the house in disarray, with people scurrying in and out. What's happening? Avoiding a man with a bucket of paint, I inquired. Candy blushed with enthusiasm and waddled over her face. Her eyes glistened when she took hold of my hands. We have amazing news, Robin. We are expecting a child. It seemed as though someone had hit me in the stomach. Dad showed up behind her, beaming broadly. Kiddo, isn't it fantastic? You will become an older sister. Feeling more alone than ever, I faked a grin. Yes, excellent. I saw how they changed the house over the course of the weeks. Baby stuff began to appear everywhere. Rooms were painted, and new furniture came. In my own house, I felt like a ghost, undesired and invisible. Then everything went apart a month before I turned 18. After a lengthy shift at the coffee shop, I returned home from school fatigued to discover my room's door closed. It was adorned with a sweet little sign that stated baby's room in pastel letters. Dad, Candy. A feeling of fear filled me as I shouted out. Leading the way was Candy's swollen tummy as they emerged from the living room. Dad's expression was odd. It was a combination of resolve and delight. Robin, he said in a rather formal tone. I've been chatting to Candy. For the nursery, we need your room. We believe that you should move out. It seemed like the world was tilting on its axis. Get out. However, where should I go? Candy hurried ahead and thrust a bag into my grasp. Do not be concerned. I packed her belongings myself. I should be grateful to you. Really? The first maid care to include everything that is essential to you. A mess of clothing and a few personal belongings were inside the luggage when I opened it. Everything else. My art materials and books. Mom's treasures were gone. However, with tears in my eyes, I stumbled. But this is my home. Dad's expression grew stern. No more. Robin, it's time for you to mature. I ran away, taking the suitcase. I was at Lisa's doorway, crying uncontrollably as I told her what had occurred when Lisa's expression went stormy. Those? She calmed herself by taking a big breath. You will remain with us, so don't worry, my love. It's not over yet. She strode to the phone and dialed her attorney, describing the circumstances in a flurry of words. As she spoke, I sat numbly on the couch. With a ferocious glow in her eyes, she turned to face me after hanging up. Listen to me, Robin. That residence, you own it. It was left to you by your mother. Keep in mind that you cannot formally manage it until you are 18, but you'll have a month to do anything you want with it. A glimmer of hope sprang within my breast. Therefore, they cannot just expel me. Aunt Lisa gave a headshake. No, they are unable to. You can also expel them when you become 18. In years, for the first time. I smiled. My face lit up with a sincere smile. With a louder voice than I had anticipated, I said, 1 month. Only another month. I experienced a range of feelings as I got comfortable in Lisa's guest room that evening, including hurt, rage, and a building sense of resolve. Candy and Dad believed they had finally defeated me, but they were unaware of what was about to happen. My 18th birthday came with a clear and brilliant dawn. I was both excited and anxious when I got up, since I knew that today would be the day when everything changed. Lisa and I were driven to the residence by Uncle Mark, my home. I inhaled deeply as we pulled up. I was bracing myself for what lay ahead. With my pulse thumping in my chest, I loudly pounded as we marched up to the front door. The door opened after a time. When Dad noticed us, his expression darkened as he stood there. Candy, with her pregnant tummy considerably larger than I recalled, waddled into view behind him. "Why are you here?" Dad insisted, ignoring the fact that it was my birthday. I looked him in the eye and straightened my shoulders. "Dad, this is my 18th birthday. What did you overlook?" He frowned. "That doesn't explain your silent presence here." I gave him the mail with the notice of eviction in it. As he read it, his cheeks flushed. Anger made his hands shake. "What on earth is this?" he yelled. "It is a notice of eviction," calmly, I said. "You've got a month to leave the property." Candy started crying. "This is impossible." She let out a cry. "I have a few weeks to complete this." "What are we meant to do?" Even though I felt a little guilty, I ignored it. "Don't you have a flat?" "The one that you have been leasing. You won't be without a house." They began yelling and then referred to me as a monster. Ungrateful and harsh. Uncle Mark and Lisa supported me as I held my ground. "We're not going anywhere," Dad shouted. "We call this place home." I moved forward and pushed through them to enter the home. "No, it isn't. I call it home. And I will be forced to call the police if you refuse to leave on your own volition," Dad sputtered. "I invested in this establishment. Mom's money was used for all the improvements," I reminded him. "You haven't invested any of your own money." Uncle Mark intervened as he surged forward, perhaps threatening to strike me. Dad quickly retreated. "He is losing his fight." Candy pulled on Dad's arm while still crying. "What are we going to do, John?" "My apartment's occupants won't be leaving for a month." I gave a shrug. I could feel the coldness I was unaware I had. "I'll follow the law, but it seems like an issue with you. Today is the first of a month, not another day." As we drove off, we left them standing there in disbelief and rage. A burden was lifted off my shoulders. I felt like I had control over my life for the first time in years. It was a fight of attrition in the month after my 18th birthday. Dad and Candy did everything in their power to ruin my life because they were upset over being evicted. They would unintentionally shatter dishes, leaving me to tidy up the fragments. Upon returning home, I would see walls that had recently been splattered with paint, always little enough to be considered an accident. The home my mother had carefully maintained and where I had grown up was turning into a battleground. Candy would pretend to be innocent when saying "boops" after bringing down a second base. Being pregnant makes me clumsy. Counting down the days until I could take back my area, I gritted my teeth and persevered. Candy then went into labor the day before the end of their month. Dad hurried her to the car and drove off to the hospital. As I watched from my window, my thoughts came up with a strategy. The following few hours were filled with a lot of activity. I gathered their possessions, every t-shirt, trinket, every memento of their existence. I filled the garage to overflowing with boxes. I then changed the locks by calling a locksmith. I heard a vehicle come up as darkness fell. The air was filled with angry shouting, and then there was a hammering on the door. "Robin, now open this door," Dad's voice roared. On the other side, I stood, heart pounding but steady resolve. "Your month is over. You must go. Are you crazy?" he yelled. "Our kid has just been born. This is impossible." Candy's cries became part of the noise. "Have a heart, Robin, please." I was hesitant for a second. However, I then recalled all the instances in which they had not been kind or considerate to me. "The garage contains your belongings," I yelled. "You should take them to your flat, in my opinion. I'll contact the cops if you don't leave in 1 hour." They called me all the names in the book and flung obscenities at me. But I didn't back down. I observed them loading their belongings into their car from the window an hour later. Red-faced and angry, Dad was shooting me while holding his child in his arms. Horrible looks as they sped off. I had a range of complicated feelings, including relief, melancholy, and a sense of closure. I had ended one chapter of my life and started a new one. The weeks that followed were filled with a lot of activity. I wiped off any traces of Dad and Candy's presence by thoroughly cleaning the entire house. I felt Mom's presence as I reclaimed our house and put her pictures back where they belonged. I decided to live in the dormitories when it came time for college. I wanted to be among people my own age and experience life. "Are you certain you want to rent out the house after years of being alone?" As she assisted me in relocating to my dorm room, I at least asked. I gave a nod. "It's the sensible course of action. Furthermore, I don't believe I'm yet prepared to live there full time." Too many memories. She gave me a shoulder squeeze. I get it. Do not be concerned. I'll watch the location for you. As I become accustomed to my collegiate life, I experienced a freedom I had never experienced before. I became pals, joined organizations, committed myself fully to my studies. Slowly, the burden I had been bearing for years started to go away. My phone rang with a text from Dad one evening when I was studying in my dorm room. I hadn't heard from him since the eviction until now. It said, "Candy and I are having trouble. The infant requires items. Are you able to assist us?" For a long time, I gazed at the message, a tornado of feelings rushing through me. I then banned his number with a firm click. I knew it was essential, although others could consider it harsh. I couldn't recover if I continued to live with that poison. I wanted to honor Mom's memory by using the resources she had given me to create a better future.